Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 22nd, 2022. Steve Bannon, former top advisor to former President Donald Trump, convicted in federal court of contempt of Congress for not complying with a subpoena from the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is promising an appeal. We'll hear from him in a moment, plus his lawyer. The final hearing of the January 6th committee was Thursday night. Final hearing at least until the fall. We'll get analysis from a Washington Examiner reporter. President Joe Biden's physician saying the president's symptoms have improved as he continues recovering from COVID-19. President today taking part virtually in a meeting with his economic team on gas prices, telling reporters, "I feel much better than I sound." And Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan warning that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court is at risk if it strays too far from public opinion. This follows several high-profile controversial opinions this term, including the overturning of Roe v. Wade, doing away with the constitutional right to abortion. This from CNN, a federal grand jury found former Trump advisor Steve Bannon guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack. Bannon faces a minimum sentence of 30 days in jail, according to federal law. After 2 days of hearing evidence and witness testimony, the jury reached a unanimous verdict in less than 3 hours. Outside the courthouse in Washington, D.C., Steve Bannon and attorney David Schoen speaking to reporters.
I want to start by thanking the jury. We respect their decision today. I really want to thank those hardworking citizens of Washington, D.C. that had to take an entire week off to go through this, so their thanks. We respect their decision. We may have lost a we're not going to lose this war, okay? David Schoen's going to talk here in a second about exactly what the jury heard. They came to their conclusion, right, about what was put on in that. David Schoen's going to talk to you about our appeals process. But listen, in the closing, the prosecutor missed one very important phrase, right? I stand with Trump and the Constitution, and I will never back off that, ever.
This didn't seem like the misdemeanor from hell, Mr. Bannon. What happened?
I thought it was pretty good hell.
This is round one. That's what happened. This is a bulletproof appeal. Have you ever in another case seen a judge 6 times say in the case that he thinks the standard for willfulness is wrong? He said it doesn't comport with modern jurisprudence. He said it doesn't comport with the standard, the traditional definition. But he said he feels his hands were bound by a 1961 decision. You will see this case reversed on appeal. You will see all of these resources, 3 federal prosecutors, 4 FBI agents for misdemeanor, being wasted. You cannot find another crime in which misdemeanor or felony, in which a person is convicted without believing or knowing or having reason to believe he or she did anything wrong. That's the standard that was applied in this case. The government said from the start the standard they were urging on the court was Bannon subpoenaed and did Bannon show up? Doesn't matter his reasons. They won the case, maybe in closing today. They lost their appeal in closing today. The overreaching by the government in this case has been extraordinary on every level. But shame on this office of the United States Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice for how far they put forward an argument today that completely tears asunder constitutional principle of separation of powers. They argued to the jury today that when a person gets a subpoena and executive privilege is invoked, it's for Congress to decide whether the executive privilege is valid and how broad it is. That's absolutely false.
David Schoen, attorney for Steve Bannon, alongside Steve Bannon outside the D.C. courthouse after the guilty verdict from the jury. Bannon, at the end of their statements, also had some words for the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol that had issued that subpoena.
Hang on. I want to thank the jury for the effort they did, the judge, particularly the court administration here, everybody. I only have one disappointment, and that is the gutless members of that show trial committee. The J6 committee didn't have the guts to come down here and testify in open court. Thank you very much.
Does this embolden them? Mr. Bannon, does this embolden the committee?
Sure. What's your understanding of where the 2 motions?
Steve Bannon outside the courthouse. The judge said that he'll be sentenced in October, but as you heard, they do plan an appeal. Bannon is one of two uncooperative witnesses from the January 6th committee charged so far by the Justice Department with contempt of Congress. The other is Peter Navarro, former Donald Trump White House advisor, and he has pleaded not guilty. The final public hearing of the January 6th committee, at least until this fall, was Thursday night. It focused on what former President Trump was doing during the 3 hours that the U.S. Capitol was being attacked by a mob of his supporters, and specifically the committee members showing evidence that Donald Trump was not telling them to stop the assault. One of the committee members that led the presentation Thursday night, Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, was interviewed on CNN today. This segment with him begins with some of his words from Thursday night's hearing.
But if January 6th has reminded us of anything, I pray it has reminded us of this. Laws are just words on paper. They mean nothing without public servants dedicated to the rule of law and who are held accountable by a public that believes oaths matter more than party tribalism or the cheap thrill of scoring political points. We, the people, must demand more of our politicians and ourselves. Oaths matter. Character matters. Truth matters. If we do not renew our faith and commitment to these principles, this great experiment of ours, our shining beacon on a hill, will not endure.
A stark warning there, and Congressman Adam Kinzinger joins me now. Thanks for taking the time this morning.
You bet. Hey.
You speak about accountability in your closing statement there. You said to Armando Raju as you left the hearing yesterday that you do believe the former president has criminal exposure. Do you believe the committee has presented sufficient evidence for the Justice Department to indict the former president?
Yeah, look, again, it's a question for justice. I think we have proven, not basically just in this hearing, we've proven different components of a criminal case against Donald Trump or people around him in every hearing. And I think taken in totality, this represents the greatest effort to overturn the will of the people, to conspire against the will of the people, and to conspire against American democracy that we've ever had, frankly, since the Civil War. So, yeah, I think we've proven that. It's up to justice now to make a decision. Look, Jim, I want to be clear. We don't want to become a country that the next administration prosecutes the prior administration. That happens in failed democracies. But this is a different situation. If we become a country that accepts attempts at coups and attempts at overcoming the will of the American people, we can't survive that. We literally cannot survive that, and that in and of itself is a precedent which is unsustainable for this country.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, member of the January 6th Investigative Committee, interviewed on CNN today. There's a story in the Kansas City Star. The U.S. House Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol showed a video Thursday night of U.S. Senator Josh Hawley fleeing the Senate chamber that spread rapidly through the internet, was set to theme music and mocked on late-night television. On Friday morning, the Missouri Republican tweeted a link to his campaign website, which is selling a white coffee mug with an illustration of Hawley holding his fist up to protesters who later stormed the U.S. Capitol over the words, "Show me strong." On top of the link, he added a kissy face emoji, a smiley face with lips puckered, and a small heart near the mouth. That from the Kansas City Star. Well, Congressman Kinzinger tweeting today a screenshot of that video of Senator Hawley running during the attack, and with this caption, "Worth remembering, Josh Hawley was the first senator to say he would object to the Electoral College, causing a cascade of Ted Cruz's. There would not have been as much oxygen to Trump's coup plan without fist pump McRunpants." That tweet from Adam Kinzinger. Congressman Jim Banks, Republican from Indiana, was initially named to sit on the January 6th committee by House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, but that selection was vetoed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. On Thursday night, Congressman Banks said this on Fox News Channel.
The verdict is in. The January 6th committee is a complete dud. Remember, this was all about blocking Republicans from winning back the House majority and keeping Donald Trump's name off the ballot. when he runs again in 2024. They're going to end up spending over $10 million. They've interviewed over 1,000 people. They have 100,000 documents in their possession, most of which that they're not willing to make public. And this is the best that they can do. This hearing tonight, the capstone event, the primetime hearing, this is the best that they can do. They haven't proven anything. If they've done anything, they've exonerated President Donald Trump and Republicans who supported him. At the end of the day, too, you got the Pelosi's doing insider stock trading. You got Hunter Biden's legal issues. You have this film crew for Stephen Colbert coming to the Capitol. The Biden DOJ is supposed to be colorblind. Instead, they view everything through the political prism of ideology of those on the right and left. It's a two-tier system of justice.
Congressman Jim Banks, Republican from Indiana, on Fox News Channel Thursday night as the primetime January 6th committee hearing was about halfway through. That's when he appeared on the station. This morning, C-SPAN spoke about the January 6th committee hearings in general. There have been 8 of them this month. We had on James Antle, Washington Examiner politics editor.
Well, I think in a lot of cases, the basic facts are known. I think that it is sort of smaller details that have been the larger revelations. But what the committee is trying to do is weave all of the facts into a narrative. And so they've been criticized, but also praised for the high production quality of the hearings. They've really done things with congressional hearings in terms of the television presentation that they really haven't done before. I mean, congressional hearings still mostly look like they did in the 1960s, the 1950s. They've really kind of brought it into the 21st century. So there's an advantage to the fact that it's a bipartisan committee, but the 2 Republicans on the committee are essentially in lockstep in terms of how they view the events of January 6th with all of the Democratic members. So it doesn't have the cross-examination element that most of these investigations have. So that hurts some of its credibility, but it also helps it in terms of being able to present a cohesive narrative, because there is no he said, she said. There is, every member kind of is committed to a certain framing of the events of January 6th, and they're able to spell that out without any interruption or contradiction. All of that happens after the fact, people critiquing it when the hearings are over. So they've been able, I think, to present things in a very cohesive and coherent way. I don't know that very many people who don't already agree with the basic argument the committee is making are watching, but I think some are. And you have seen some slippage for former President Donald Trump in polling, even among Republicans, since the hearings have begun. I think even if people don't agree with how the committee is presenting the facts or with their basic argument about President Trump, there is a possibility Republicans are going to say to themselves, is this what we even want to be talking about in 2024? And that could work to the detriment of the former president.
Why haven't Republicans like Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz or even Kevin McCarthy hold their own briefings, either when the hearing concludes the same day or if they need more time to refute what they've heard the next day?
Right. Well, I think there was some talk of doing that. It didn't ultimately happen in that way. There was supposed to be a Republican counter investigation. I think you can't really compete with the main event in that way. I mean, obviously, I think you can reaffirm what your supporters already think and give them sort of some food for thought. But it's sort of like when they do those presidential debates and you have a main stage of the people who are considered the real contenders, and then you have the kids' table debate sort of afterwards or beforehand with the lesser candidates, the lower polling candidates. That second card event just doesn't have the same impact. And I think that would be the problem that any Republican counter messaging would have. I think they've mostly tried to go after it on social media in real time, and then in interviews on cable news stations afterwards. But yeah, there hasn't really been any effective counter programming.
What do you think of former Vice President Mike Pence's actions lately, the things that he said, the groups that he's going before. Tonight there's dueling rallies in Arizona between the former president and the former vice president.
Right.
What do you make of the steps that he's taking? What's behind it?
Well, I think number one, he has no choice, right? I mean, he broke with the president on January 6th, which I think a lot of people think the Constitution, and I think the Constitution required him to do. But that obviously created a rift between him and the former president and a certain subset of the former president's supporters. So on the one hand, he has really no choice but to then distinguish himself from former President Trump. But secondly, I think he does feel very differently about the 2020 election and the events of January 6th. I think he wants to defend his role and his decision to certify the election results, especially as somebody who clearly would like to potentially be the 2024 Republican nominee running against the man whose election he certified. So I think there's an argument that he knows he's going to have to make. And I think to some degree, Pence has been trying to walk this line between representing the pre-Trump Republican Party, the sort of from Reagan onward, while also being a little bit of an ambassador to Trump's innovations on the GOP brand, right? Where Trump was a little bit more working class friendly, more populist, more critical of things like free trade, open immigration, foreign interventions abroad. So Pence has tried to sort of be a bridge between the Reagan and Trump wings of the party. This might force him to choose a little bit more.
Does he make that run if former President Trump also runs in 2024?
Right, I think he's positioning himself very much to run regardless of what Trump does. I think it's going to be difficult if Trump runs because he's going to be forced to pretty much talk about the events of the last election, which I think could be damaging to Trump, but I also think could be damaging to Pence. Not very forward-looking. I think it creates an opening for someone like Ron DeSantis, who can sort of channel some of the issues that matter to Trump voters without really being invested in everything that happened on January 6th and November 2020. But I definitely think Pence is one of the Republicans who seems likely to run regardless of what the former president does.
James Antle, Washington Examiner politics editor, joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal. You can find our full discussion with them archived at our website, cspan.org. President Biden today is condemning an attack on Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York during a campaign stop Thursday night. Zeldin is running for governor. A man carrying a sharp object confronted Zeldin on a stage. The man was tackled, arrested, and has been charged. President Biden's statement reads, "I condemn the attack on Congressman Zeldin in the strongest terms. As I've said before, violence has absolutely no place in our society or our politics. I'm especially grateful for the courage of those who immediately intervened and that he is unharmed and was able to continue his speech. I also want to thank the law enforcement officers who quickly took action and are investigating this attack that defies our fundamental democratic values." That statement from President Biden. There's also this from the New York Times. The attempted assault on Congressman Lee Zeldin inflamed a fierce debate over the state's public safety laws on Friday, hours after the man accused of charging the candidate with a pointed weapon was released without bail. A statement from the New York Republican Party chair, Nick Langworthy, on Twitter: "Only in Kathy Hochul's New York could a maniac violently attack a candidate for governor and then be released without bail. This is what happens when you destroy the criminal justice system." Kathy Hochul is the Democratic governor of New York who is running for re-election. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN has unfiltered coverage of the House January 6 committee hearings investigating the attack on the Capitol. Go to cspan.org/January6, our web resource page, to watch the latest videos of the hearings, briefings, and all of our coverage on the attack and subsequent investigation since January 6, 2021. We'll also have reaction from members of Congress and the White House, as well as journalists and authors talking about the investigation. Go to cspan.org/January6 for a fast and easy way to watch when you can't see it live.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Biden recovering from COVID-19. His physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, with an update today. It reads, President Biden completed his first full day of Paxlovid last night. His symptoms have improved. He did mount a temperature yesterday evening of 99.4 degrees Fahrenheit, which responded favorably to acetaminophen, or Tylenol. His temperature has remained normal since then. His symptoms remain characterized by runny nose and fatigue with an occasional non-productive, loose cough. His voice is deeper this morning. His pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation remain entirely normal on room air. And Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the president's physician, also adding this, the president is tolerating treatment well. Well, President Biden took part virtually today in a briefing dealing with high gas prices with members of his economic team. Here's part of it. He's greeted by Brian Deese, director of the White House National Economic Council.
Hey, Mr. President, it's great to see you.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. We've got members of your economic and energy team here, and we're prepared to start the briefing, but we'll start by turning the floor over to you, sir.
Well, thanks. Let me start by apologizing my voice. I'm feeling much better than I sound. You know, we're reading today on gas prices, and we have some really good news. Gas prices are coming down. In fact, gas prices have fallen every day this summer for 38 days in a row. Now, you know, you can find gas for $3.99 or less in more than 30,000 gas stations in more than 35 states. In some cities, it's down almost $1 from last month. We've been working really hard to bring the price down.
That's President Biden. He was on a video screen joining this meeting today with cabinet secretaries and economic assistants as he continues to isolate following his COVID-19 diagnosis. White House says that he'll be isolating for 5 days. That would take him through next Tuesday. At the end of the event, reporters trying to ask the president questions, but he didn't answer. He smiled and gave a thumbs up. Later in the White House briefing room, more on the president's health from Dr. Ashish Jha, who is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator.
As you heard, we FaceTimed with the president earlier today. I also spoke at length multiple times today with Dr. O'Connor. And as you all saw just a few minutes ago, the president is doing better. He slept well last night. He ate his breakfast and lunch. Fully. He actually showed me his plate. Didn't ask about the menu, but I did see an empty plate with crumbs, and
did, yeah.
I have some guesses about what was there, but didn't ask.
No comfort food?
Didn't ask. I did ask him about his appetite. He joked that his one regret was that his appetite had not changed. Look, he is in a very good mood. I want to take a step back and emphasize the message that you heard from Corinne. As the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, what I think every American needs to hear, what the president laid out, is that while we have a very contagious variant out there, thanks to this president's leadership, we have the ability to manage this. We are now at a point, I believe, where we can prevent nearly every COVID death in America. That is a remarkable fact. So if you are vaccinated but have not gotten a booster, this is a really good time to go and get a booster. If you're over 50 and haven't gotten a vaccine shot in the year 2022, this is a really good time to go and get a shot. They are free, they are widely available, and as you heard, if you are over the age of 50 or have any kind of chronic condition that meets CDC criteria, please consider getting treated if you have a breakthrough infection. And if you don't have a regular doctor, you can go to covid.gov and find a test to treat site near you.
Dr. Ashish Jha is White House COVID-19 response coordinator. His opening statement at today's briefing with White House reporters. Joining him, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who says that President Biden, according to their analysis, had 17 close contacts, including senior staff, and none of those people have so far tested positive for COVID-19. She was also asked by reporters for a second day in a row why the president's physician was not in the briefing room.
Why are we not hearing from Dr. O'Connor on this? I understand that you've released statements from him, but yesterday we had a difficult time comparing the description of the symptom progression from Dr. O'Connor's letter versus how you all laid it out in the briefing room. And then Dr. Jha, you did some interviews this morning, but your last update from the president was at 10 o'clock the night before.
Well, a couple of hours ago, right at 11 o'clock, you got a detailed letter from Dr. O'Connor. We've given you two detailed letters from Dr. O'Connor, and you've heard directly from him. Look, yes, you have. You've heard from the letter that is hearing directly from him. We're not playing telephone here. You're hearing directly from the physician. Yes, it is. I mean, that is hearing directly from, in his words. In his words, you are hearing directly from Dr. O'Connor, as I read out. But I'm answering your colleague's question here, so give me the second to do that. Thank you. So you've heard directly from him. And not only that, you have heard more, I would easily argue, about a mild symptoms of a virus than any other president. Dr. Jha and I were here for an hour fielding questions. We're here today answering questions. We are going to commit to making sure you're hearing from Dr. O'Connor from his daily report, detailed report from Dr. O'Connor. And here's the thing. Dr. Jha is one of the foremost experts in this field when it comes to COVID. He also has dealt with COVID patients. He clearly is running our COVID response and is a medical doctor, and he knows how this process works. And again, we should feel good and be very happy that the president is doing better, that he is improving. This is the president of the United States. He's improving, he's reacting well to the treatments, and let's not forget, we have the tools to treat this because of the work that this president has done.
Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, along with Dr. Ashish Jha, the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, in the White House briefing room. LA Times has a story that Los Angeles County is poised to impose new indoor mask rules next week as data shows the hyper-infectious BA.5 Omicron subvariant is pushing coronavirus case counts higher and sending increasing numbers of people to the hospital. They write, although a final decision is still days away, the likelihood of a mask rule has sparked growing debate in a society weary of both the pandemic and its restrictions. Similar trends are being seen across the country. A question today to the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She was interviewed by Washington Post healthcare reporter Dan Diamond.
According to the CDC, more than 500,000 Americans have tested positive for COVID this week. Joe Biden is one of them. If we can't protect the president from infection, what does it say about our ability to protect the most vulnerable Americans from infection too?
Yeah, it's a really important question. First, good wishes to the president for a speedy recovery. We know that he is on Paxlovid and that should assist with his speedy recovery, in addition to the fact that he's received his vaccine series and 2 booster shots, which really does protect him from severe disease. We know now that there's a lot of COVID out there. As you said, 500,000 documented cases this week. We've seen hospitalizations that have been on the rise since the early April, about a 2-fold increase in hospitalizations. And what we're doing is sending the messages that we have been sending all along. If you're in an area of high COVID-19 community levels, and now this week that's about 60% of our population living in those counties, we really are asking people to take the necessary precautions, to wear masks, to test if they're going to events, and to take the precautions necessary to protect them and their family.
To stay on the White House for a second, the White House has pledged to go beyond CDC guidance in caring for President Biden. For example, to make sure that he stays in isolation until he tests negative. If the White House thinks that's the right approach for the president, shouldn't that be the right approach for all Americans?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the president's protocols likely go above and beyond and have the resources to go above and beyond what every American is able and has the capacity to do. As we put forward our CDC guidance, we have to do so that they are relevant, feasible, followable by Americans. And that is Americans that live in urban jurisdictions and rural jurisdictions, that have resources and less resources, that have work constraints and many other things. So when we put forward our guidance, we do so that they reflect such that every American is able to follow them. We have said in our isolation guidance, that is guidance after you have been infected, that you really should stay home for those first 5 days. You shouldn't consider going out after those 5 days unless your symptoms have really fully resolved. And if they have, you should wear a mask if you decide to go out for those second 5 days. We also put in the option to go ahead and get a test. Not everybody has access to them, but to go ahead and get a test. And if your test remains positive, you would consider staying home until that test is negative, which is exactly what the president is doing.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky is director of the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, interviewed, a virtual interview, by Washington Post healthcare reporter Dan Diamond. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 137, NASDAQ down 225, S&P down 37. Initial claims for unemployment insurance benefits rose last week for the third week in a row by 9,000 to 251,000, which is above the pre-pandemic weekly average of about 218,000. CNBC reports that Russia's central bank today cut its key interest rate by a bigger-than-expected 150 basis points as the country deals with a strong currency, cooling inflation, and possible recession. The move takes the key rate to 8% from 9.5%, and they write it the fifth rate cut by the Central Bank of Russia so far this year after an emergency hike from 9.5% to 20% in late February, following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Also today, Russia and Ukraine signing separate agreements with Turkey and the United Nations that clears the way for exporting millions of tons of Ukrainian grain and Russian fertilizer. Associated Press says that it ends a wartime standoff that had threatened food security around the globe. This is Washington Today. Washington Post, Dateline Big Sky, Montana. They write liberal Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan said Thursday that it would be a dangerous thing for the court and for democracy if the justices stray too far from public sentiment and lose the confidence of Americans. Kagan, who dissented when the court last month overturned Roe v. Wade's guarantee of a constitutional right to abortion, said the court's legitimacy is threatened when long-standing precedent is discarded and the court's actions are seen as motivated by personnel changes among the justices. Here's a bit of what the justice said as she spoke to about 500, mostly judges and lawyers, according to the Washington Post.
The thing about judicial decision-making is that you can't throw the bums out. We're in there for life, and there's, especially in particular with respect to our constitutional rulings, there's no way for any other branch of government to reverse them. So if the court is, and I'm not talking about any particular decision or even any particular series of decisions, but if over time the court loses all connection with the public and with public sentiment, that's a dangerous thing for a democracy. We have a court that does important things, and if that connection is lost, that's a dangerous thing for the democratic system as a whole. So that's why the legitimacy of the court is so important, and why public confidence in the court is so important. But then the question becomes, I think you said, well, what could we say to people to foster that public confidence, to advance the court's legitimacy? And the truth of the matter is, I don't think that there's anything that I or any of my colleagues can do on a stage like this one to say people should have confidence in the courts. The court is a legitimate institution. I think the court earns its legitimacy, and it earns its legitimacy by what it does, by the way it behaves. Again, I'm not talking about any particular decision. There are going to be particular decisions that are going to be unpopular. But over the long haul, over the range of our decision making, the court either earns its legitimacy, its confidence, or it loses its legitimacy and its confidence. And there's nothing I can do to kind of decree public confidence in the court from a stage like this one. Instead, I and my colleagues, the way we behave is what fosters public confidence or what doesn't.
Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan at the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals Judicial Conference held in Montana on Thursday. Also during her appearance, she talked about whether the Supreme Court might continue to live stream oral arguments of cases, something that started last term.
With regards to once the Supreme Court opens up to the public again, do you think it will continue with the live streaming?
So we haven't talked about this. I'm sure it will be a topic of conversation. The live streaming was a consequence of closing the courtroom to the public. And so there might be arguments that once we open the courtroom to the public, we should get rid of the live streaming. So go back to the old system. I personally would prefer to keep the live streaming. I think that live streaming has worked very well, and we've seen no problems with it, but I only get one vote of 9.
Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan at the Judicial Conference in Montana. The live audio of the case oral arguments came about when the court was closed to the public starting March 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic, and the courtroom for oral arguments only open to credentialed press and court personnel. Some of the decisions this term in the 6-3 conservative majority current makeup of the Supreme Court has led many Democratic members of Congress to advocate expanding the court. One proposal is to add 4 more justices. Today happens to be the 85th anniversary of the U.S. Senate voting down a proposal to expand the court. It was proposed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was officially known as the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937. It's often referred to as the Court Packing Plan. It would have given the president the power to appoint 1 additional justice to the court, up to a maximum of 6 for every member of the court over the age of 70 years. President Roosevelt sold the idea to the public in a radio address, a fireside chat as it was known, a few months earlier.
Since the rise of the modern movement for social and economic progress through legislation, the court has more and more often and more boldly asserted a power to veto laws passed by the Congress and by state legislatures in complete disregard of this original limitation, which I have just read. In the last 4 years, the sound rule of giving statutes the benefit of all reasonable doubt has been cast aside. The court has been acting not as a judicial body, but as a policy-making body. When the Congress has sought to stabilize national agriculture, to improve the conditions of labor, to safeguard business against unfair competition, to protect our national resources, and in many other ways to serve our clearly national needs, the majority of the court has been assuming the power to pass on the wisdom of these acts of the Congress and to approve or disapprove the public policy written into these laws.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt giving a radio address March 1937. And on this day in 1937, 85 years ago, the U.S. Senate voting down his bill to expand the Supreme Court, often referred to as court packing. The vote in the Senate was 70-20 against. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.